It's Mike with It's Pittsfield Tonight. It is Thursday, August 20th, and I'm going to jump right into it. So we're going to talk about the recent violence in the city, and that has been the focal point of conversation for a couple weeks now. And in the past 2 months, we've had 4 incidents that involved shootings. The first one, someone lost their life on that one. There was a victim that was shot and killed. I believe 2 people were shot in that incident. 1 was killed. There was a suspect named and identified and a warrant issued for that person's arrest. As far as I know, they have not been apprehended as of yet. The 3 shooting incidents after that, as far as the public knows and information that's been put out, is no one has been apprehended in those as of yet. And I think that is a big part of why people are so upset, because it's scary and these are concentrated in a certain area. Now, I know, and listen, I'll add this in the beginning of me saying what I'm going to say, but I have always been a big supporter, as people who've been following this page for years know, I've always been a big supporter of our PPD, of law enforcement, of our Berkshire County District Attorney's Office. And that's that. I always have been. That has not changed. But one of the things that it bothers me as just as a citizen, that when a shooting takes place or something like these incidents take place, and the first thing you hear from some of the officials are, everything's fine, don't worry about it, everything's safe, there's nothing to see here, kind of thing. And I can't stand that, because when things like this take place, they do get people concerned. They are scary for people. Not the last shooting, but the one before that, where I believe it was 2 vehicles off of a notice street shooting at each other. And a couple individuals were injured in that one. A friend of mine who lives right there near where it happened, he posted on social media right afterwards that, all this gunfire started. He grabbed his dog, jumped on the floor, was getting below the window lines. That's scary, and nobody should have to live like that. Now, yes, I'm sure you can look at statistics and see where there's been times in the city's history where we've had much worse violent summers, maybe in the 80s or 90s, or even just back under the previous district attorney's administration. Going back 4 or 5 years ago, we had a season there that was unbelievable. We had I don't know how many. I think it was the most shootings in modern history, at least, in that short period of time. So yes, I can get all that, and I know the mayor was on the radio this morning with WTBR, and he said something to that effect that we've had other years where it's been far more violent, and he did say I understand people's concerns. 1 shooting is 1 too many. He did say that, but I just feel like to come out with that when people are upset is the wrong stuff to come out with. What you want to come out with initially is, how are we addressing this? Because another topic that I'm going to touch on is e-bikes. But before I get into that, because these are the two of the big things that are being discussed right now. But why I'm mentioning that now is because it correlates to what I'm going to talk about, which is our police department and the number of officers we have. One of the things I have been hearing since I've been doing It's Pittsfield Tonight. So our previous mayor, Linda Tyre, used to say all the time. In fact, it was part of her campaign platform when she initially ran for mayor, is that a city our size needs more police officers. I think the number of 120 was thrown out there. A city our size should have 120 police officers. But at the end of the day, Okay? The numbers that we have in the Pittsfield Police Department have been between 85 and 95 for decades and decades, going back to the 70s or 60s, as far back as I could look where I could find information in the type of searches I did. I didn't do some huge investigative in-depth search, but for decades, that number has stayed consistent between 85 and 95 officers. One of the questions I asked during the last mayoral debates I did for this previous election where Peter Marchetti won and became our mayor, but during those debates, I repeatedly asked about community policing, because we used to have community policing here. And community policing, having officers assigned to a beat and walking that beat and being out and engaging with the people on their beat and getting to know them and they get to know the officers, that's huge. And community policing works. It does. And I don't understand why we can't have beat cops. Again, I keep hearing we're short on officers, we're short on officers. If that is the case, then we have been short on officers for 50 plus years, if that's the case. And I don't get why we can't have that type of policing. Community policing works. It works. If you have beat cops in these areas, like, certain part of the West Side, a small radius where a lot of this violence is taking place, why not have community policing there? Wouldn't that be like the first step to addressing this? And I'm sure right now there probably is somewhat of a beefed up police presence there, but that's not what I'm talking about either. I'm talking about community policing. Just like when you want to talk about e-bikes, some of the biggest problems we've seen with e-bikes are downtown on North Street. I was on North Street today. 6 different times I saw bicycles on the sidewalks. Out of those times, and I was only down there for about 45 minutes, I would say at least 3 of them, but I think 4 of them were e-bikes on the sidewalks. If you're going to have laws, they have to be enforced. Having beat cops on North Street would solve this. So again, hearing that, we're short on officers. Were we short on officers then because we had the same number of officers, were we short on officers in the 90s when we had officers walking the beat? Or in the 80s when we had officers walking the beat? Were we short on officers then? Because the number was the same, the population was higher. So, because at the same time, when you're hearing from some of the people that crime was worse at other times, so if crime is better and lower now than it was then, and the amount of officers is the same now as it was then why can't we have community policing? And I think that's a huge part of all this. That would be the first step. If I was in charge, that's what I would say. How do we structure this where we can start having officers on the beat? Why not take advantage of things like e-bikes and use those for community policing? If an officer has to get somewhere quickly and they're saying maybe that's a problem, that responding to something on foot, then how about having them on bicycles and use e-bikes? Right? You have class 1 and class 2 e-bikes right now. A class 2 with pedal assist while you're pedaling will do 28 miles an hour. That's pretty quick if you've got to respond somewhere on your beat. I just think there's so many different ways of looking at this, but it all boils down to a stronger police presence and community policing. And I just feel really strongly about that. And that's with both of those topics, with violence, with e-bikes, with jaywalking. I know I talked to the chief and I asked him about e-bikes, and they said that they were waiting on some of these new laws that are getting ready to go through. And I do understand that. But I'm talking about the existing laws of bicycles on the sidewalks and bicycles following the proper procedure and rules of the road. Those laws have been there for as long as I've been alive. So enforcing those, jaywalking, and I know he said it's like a $1 fine, and they kind of always looked at that as if you're jaywalking and you're not crossing in a crosswalk and doing what you're supposed to, then, if you get hit or something happens to you, it's kind of on you. It's your fault. But the other side of that is I've been on North Street just recently, like one of my trips up there last week or the week before, it was recently, where I had two individuals walk out in front of me and they were arguing with each other in the middle of the road, a male and female, having an argument with each other, screaming at each other and standing there in the road. And when I hit my horn, they flipped me off. Now, I don't know if legally I could have run them over and it would be their fault. I don't want to be put in that position. I don't want to injure and hurt somebody. So, I just think having beat cops on North Street, for one, would be a huge help. And then in some of the neighborhoods, why can't we do that? Why can't we look at going back to community policing and taking a different look at how we do this and looking at some of the policies and procedures that were used at different times, that it worked. It worked. So there's data that shows it works. So anyway, that's where I'm at with all that. I've received a ton of messages from a lot of you about these shootings. I am going to reach out to Chief Madalena. I am going to reach out to the mayor. I am going to reach out to the district attorney. And I am going to reach out to the sheriff again. So I'll be scheduling some interviews with them coming up in the near future. I know they got their hands full right now. And I think it's great what the DA did. That's another thing I wanted to mention briefly, then I'll wrap it, is I was really upset to see one of the media outlets, I think it was Mass Live, put out an article saying Berkshire County District Attorney forms anti-gun task force or something like that, or task force to address gun violence. And when I saw that article and started reading the comments on it, everybody was talking about gun laws. But in reality, because I received the same press release that they would have, it never said the district attorney was forming a task force to address gun violence. It said the district attorney's office was forming a task force with the PPD and working with them to address the violence we're seeing. Yes, shootings are part of that, but that's not what the press release did not say. It was a task force for gun violence. And it upset me that those comments and that whole thing became about gun laws. Because if anybody knows the district attorney or has listened to him in any interviews, he has an LTC. He's a big supporter of law-abiding citizens having a license to carry and being able to do all that. He's a big supporter of that, and he's been very clear about that. One of the things that when people want to talk about guns that they're not discussing is 3D printed guns. It's a huge problem, and I rarely see that in arguments when people are talking about gun violence. 3D printed guns, you can have all the gun laws in the world you want, but that technology and the 3D printed guns hitting the market is huge. And there has to be something done about that, but they're not being made by the big manufacturers. They're not stolen guns that are ending up on the streets. They're making them. And that's an issue. And that's a big issue. You can do your research on that and see that. So anyway, I do want to do some follow-up interviews with all of them, and I will be reaching out to Chief Madalena, to District Attorney Shagru, to Mayor Marchetti, and to Sheriff Bowler. So that is it for now. Pay attention. Again, if you know something, say something. There's anonymous tip lines and everything. But the community being actively engaged and involved in this stuff is important. Keep it civil. Name calling and pointing fingers and blaming, all that's not going to do any good. But the community coming together saying, we're better than this and our community deserves better than this and we're not going to live like this, that is how you get there. And I think, again, community policing is the answer. So, all right, I could go on and on and on. That's it for now. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll catch you all in the next day or two.